This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This podcast is brought to you by Aura. 2024 has seen a surge in high-profile data breaches, raising serious concerns about the security of personal information. This past summer, National Public Data reported a breach potentially affecting every American. That's why we're thrilled to partner with Aura. Aura is a complete online safety toolkit, which includes a variety of other features to keep you safe online, including a VPN for secure browsing, data broker opt-out to stop companies from selling your personal information, a password manager to help you create and store strong passwords, and more. For a limited time, Aura is offering our listeners a 14-day trial plus a check of your data to see if your personal information has been leaked online, all for free when you visit aura.com/safety. That's aura.com/safety to sign up for a 14-day free trial and start protecting you and your loved ones. That's aura.com/safety. Certain terms apply, so be sure to check the site for.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Matt Pais. He is a writer and the author of a wonderful book, Talk 90s With Me, 23 Unpredictable Conversations with Stars of an Unforgettable Decade. It's an interesting thing, and as you'll hear from our conversation, to look back on a decade that you lived through and to find it becoming almost a historical period. But that's where we are, so that's what we're doing. And I'd highly recommend this book. It's really interesting. Matt has brought together some really eclectic choices of interviewees and contributors. So I think it's a great way of exploring that era and exploring film through the people who made these films. If you enjoy the conversation, please remember to like, subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. And if you enjoy this podcast, why don't you give another podcast a try, Cinema Italia, which you can find on all the usual places, all the usual platforms, I should say, Apple, Spotify, etc. It's an exploration of Italian cinema, the whole breadth of Italian cinema, from gialli and spaghetti westerns all the way through to Fellini classics and modern day films of Luca Guadagnino, and special guests on there from the world of Italian cinema, as well as critics and writers who are talking to me about their favorite Italian film. So give it a shot if you haven't already. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation. Went to the supermarket just now to buy some stuff, and it's that thing where you think it's hot, but I like the heat, I don't care, I'm okay, this is summer, and then you suddenly, it's like you're walking through some other element that isn't air. You're everything's going slower, your brain is just, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe it is too hot actually.
There's definitely that line where it becomes uncomfortable. It reminds me of all the years where because music editor was part of my role also back in the day. So every time like Lollapalooza and Pitchfork and the big music festivals came around in Chicago, I was always going to those. And there were a few times when it gets the temperature at Lollapalooza tends to escalate beautifully in tandem with the crowds. So not only are you caught in a swarm and walking like you're like doing the pencil dive into a pool, but it's also gotten quite sweaty by the end of the day. But there were a lot of reasons why I found it more enjoyable earlier on with sort of the discoveries when they were still booking rock bands not terribly long ago. But like I saw Royal Blood on the smallest stage at the festival. And that was extraordinary. And that feels like a long time ago now. But I just loved, there's some good headliners too, but small stage discoveries tends to be a little bit more rewarding sometimes.
I saw Nirvana in Reading in 91, I think it was. And they were playing kind of the middle of the afternoon. I have some very clear memories about that gig because it was the middle of the afternoon, so they were way down the bill. It was on the main stage, so it was a big, but it was way down the bill. And I remember this is how the sort of audience was like, there was like a 3 or 4 deep bunch of people in the mosh pit. But that was it. That was mosh pit was like 3 or 4 deep. And then everybody else was just sitting around sort of like with that sort of relaxed, beery sort of show us what you've got sort of attitude. And then by the end of their gig, I think everybody was into it and everybody was up on their feet and everything. But it was definitely it was definitely Nirvana before Nirvana. And it was kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, that's awesome that you got to be there for that. It's certainly provocative to think of when talking about music, to think about sort of why certain bands become what they become, but also even to take away the biggest hit and then look at their discography and recognize, like, because a lot of, even though Nirvana happened at the time that it happened, of course, everyone that breaks big has to have that one song that they hang their hat on. Hopefully several songs, but even it reminds me of, I read Pitchfork's Sunday review this weekend was of the Wallflowers Bringing Down the Horse, and just thinking about album tracks versus singles and just the degree to which, to your point, like if Smells Like Teen Spirit hadn't happened, Nirvana is a great band, but you can see them, a lot of people sort of standing around listening, being like, especially with some of that earlier stuff that was not exactly like super digestible for the masses necessarily. So like the idea of like culture moving along, like sort of moving as one sometimes when something becomes popular, you see the point I'm sort of circling around.
No, absolutely. I mean, there were definitely, it was funny because those were the years where we had the Pixies and the Sonic Youth. And so there were loads of groups that were doing noisy guitar and also sort of quiet, loud sort of structures that Nirvana sort of based themselves on. And I remember thinking when I saw Nirvana, yeah, they're good, but I've already got the Pixies. Why do I need, you know what I mean? And why do I need, what have you got that's more than what I'm already getting? You know, it's a little bit like listening to Coldplay after you've listened to Radiohead. I mean, I'd listen to Coldplay before I listened to Radiohead, but I never do it the other way around. Because once you've listened to Radiohead, why do you need this other British guitar band?
We could go down a very deep hole once we start talking about that, so I'm going to table my thoughts on Coldplay and Radiohead and Led Zeppelin, Greta Van Fleet. We can do the whole music thing.
Right. Well, let's start with that. It's an interesting point that you started your writing career in music, in music journalism. Is that correct?
So I was fortunate enough that I was doing movies and music at the same time. I started right out of college. I started as an intern at a website called Metromix, which was focused on kind of what to do in the city in Chicago. And it was something I had read for a long time, and it was really exciting to get to intern there right out of school. And through a number of course, luck and timing are always relevant in life, and it just so happened that our editor at the time moved on to a new role, and the music editor became our editor. But I'm putting the cart before the horse a little bit, because when I got there, like many people probably when they get out of school or starting their first job, I didn't really know what was going to come next by any means, and I wanted to give them every possible reason to want to keep me around. So this was at the time when hours were not quite as defined, let's say. So the cliche of first in, last out has value for a reason. And I never left without going around to every part of the staff and saying, is there something I can help you with? I took on every possible, in addition to the sort of basics of an intern in that world of calling bars to check their hours and writing sort of basic pieces about events happening at various places. I also said yes to pretty much every writing opportunity. Like I wrote a first person piece about a beer pedicure, even though I had no knowledge of like spa treatments by any means. I'd never had a pedicure before. I somewhat comically like kind of cut my nails like before I went, because I thought my feet should at least look reasonably good going in there. I was like,
I would do exactly the same. I would do the same. I'm not going to go in there with my gnarly feet. And
yeah, I appreciate that, John. So it was just a great chance to say yes to everything and give reason for a 3-month internship to go longer than 3 months. So what started at 3 then became 5 and 7 and sort of kept going because I wanted to stay and they wanted to keep me around. And to condense the story a little bit, maybe, let's see, it was probably 5 months or so into that internship when the Chicago International Film Festival came around, and no one for Metromix or the paper, the kind of print version, which was called Red Eye, no one was really owning the movie section at that time. Red Eye was still pretty new, and Metromix had just been using movies content from the Chicago Tribune. So I had spent my entire college career, I applied and got onto the movie reviewing staff right away at school. Eventually was lucky enough to win an award during college for that criticism. And I said, hey, if no one, even though I'm still an intern, in theory, I shouldn't really be the one doing this, but if no one else wants to write about the Chicago Film Festival, I'd love to take a crack at adapting my voice and the kind of branding of the site, which was very much meant for kind of 18 to 35 commuters in Chicago. I'd love to write a piece on this. And they said, sure, why not? Go for it. And that, by asking that one question, by speaking up and saying, hey, can I do this? That was the start of what became 11 years as the movie critic for the Chicago Tribune's Red Eye, where I reviewed over 2,000 movies, interviewed almost anyone you can think of, eventually on video, oftentimes. And to your question a few minutes back, I was both the movie critic and the music editor at the same time, so interviewing artists who are coming through town as well.
It's like coffee and cigarettes or beer and chocolate. They go together. You can
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a natural fit.
Yeah, I don't think I know anybody who loves movies who doesn't also read and listen to music and, have other, they might not indulge in the passions, across the board with the same intensity, but it would be difficult to, I think, love movies and not love music, for instance, because music is such an integral part of movies.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it reminds me of. I am far from an expert on the way that music is used in film necessarily, but I like kind of unexpected things that come along in the way that those overlap. For example, my mind goes to when a couple of the guys from Manchester Orchestra did the music for Swiss Army Man, which was the film by the Daniels that I much, much, much prefer.
To everything, me too.
Oh, yes.
Me too.
But I really like Manchester Orchestra and the way that they, if you didn't know that it was those guys from the band, you wouldn't necessarily assume, except for recognizing Andy Hall's voice, maybe. I don't think you would assume that that's who it was for the music they did for that film. But stuff like that, of course, the work that Trent Reznor has done, the film has been pretty fantastic too. But yeah, that's now I'm gonna think about if I can think of any exceptions to like people who are really into music that don't care too much about a film or vice versa. But I like that.
It's just that. I mean, I don't know if it'll necessarily work the other way, but if you're into film is a composite art form. You're bringing together music and acting and narrative and visual composition. So a film critic has to know something about music, has to know. Yeah, I mean, you have to. I don't know. There's an example I could give is. The New World, Terrence Malick uses Mozart and Wagner, so he's using 18th and 19th century music to tell a story which is set in the 17th century, 16th, 17th century, and King James, so 17th century, and so there's a real anachronism, and what does that do? So you kind of have to, I mean, if you're watching it, you might just think, oh, that's a nice piece of music and it goes with the thing, but it's kind of doing something strange, and that effect would be totally lost if you don't know anything about music, or for that matter, I don't know, listening to the soundtrack of Romeo and plus Juliet, the Baz Luhrmann film, or even Elvis, his version. You kind of need to have some knowledge of music to appreciate what he's trying to do. Whether he succeeds or not is another question. But I mean, I nail my colours to the mast. I very much enjoyed Elvis and Romeo plus Juliet. I think they're his two most successful films. What was your take on those?
It's been a really long time since I've seen his Romeo and Juliet. I was not a fan of Elvis.
Oh no, okay.
I thought I'm very much in the quite large camp of people who thought the framing it the way they did was not the way to go. In addition to just, I mean, what you're going to get with a Baz Luhrmann film. Usually, it's not like you can say, "Oh, I didn't know it was going to be so hectic." But even still, I thought it was dizzying and sloppy, and just needed sort of an overhaul from a storytelling perspective. It was hard for me to watch that movie and not just be like, "What? Why did you do it this way? You didn't. You didn't need to do it this way." I guess there are points for not just doing the obvious thing, but surely there was like option 3.
Yeah, yes. I mean, we won't even go into the details of Tom Hanks's accents and what have you. Let's get to the book, because I really there are two really interesting things that popped into my head as I was reading it. But one of the things was the 90s as a decade, which is what where your interviewees are sort of working, and their main they come to prominence in that decade. The 90s as a decade, as well as sort of beginning to grow as a decade of that we can separate off and think about cinematically. Maybe in a way, say, the first decade of like the noughties haven't yet. Maybe we just need a bit of time for it to percolate, but the 90s seem to be acquiring a real identity. Why do you think that is? I mean, is it just our distance in time to it, or is there something else?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that, John. I think that's an important question. And I mean, there are a lot of reasons why I wanted to write this book. It probably starts with simply that the 90s were when I first became really excited about pop culture, diving into just everything that I could watch, and certainly turning back the clock sometimes too, but there was, and every so often you'll see people posting like the marquee of a theater from that time, and marveling at not only how much was coming out at once, but the variety, and that there was something with every rating, and just something for anyone who wanted to go. And it seems so like quaint almost to look at it that way. I'm not sure if that's even the right word for it, but it was, we didn't know what we had exactly at the time, because we certainly don't have that now. And to be able to go back to that era, and certainly anyone who is going to do a book like Talk 90s with me, where I spoke with 23 people from movies and shows, like Ariana Richards, Karen Parsons, Tom Everett Scott, Billy West, Dougie Doug. Anyone who's going to write that book is going to probably connect with a totally different group of people, and not because of you're always at the whim of who says yes, of course, but this is absolutely filtered through my own experience. I cast a wide net. There were plenty of people I reached out to that were not available or not interested in participating, but I wanted to follow through on work that I thought was still worth talking about. Performances that still felt interesting, but also people that I actually wanted to talk to, and thought that there was a lot of material, well, a lot of kind of stones unturned. One of the things I believe the most when it comes to covering entertainment as a journalist is that every interview should try to be as new as possible. There's really just no point in going in there and asking the same questions that everyone's already asked. You may as well just run a wire piece if you're getting the same material. So while maybe some people don't like doing the research or just don't have time, don't think that's necessary, I always, in my time at Red Eye and afterwards, delighted in reading, watching, listening to everything that I possibly could. So to then get access to these people for conversations that lasted an average of 60 to 75 minutes, I was able to get to like a fun, thought-provoking, and kind of surprisingly open and intimate place that is able to really fill in what you're talking about of what we had in the 90s, of material that might be for kids, but is exploring it in a way that reached people in a particular way. Even I'm not saying that Little Big League is the best movie of all time, but it has a charm that, they certainly don't make kids sports movies much anymore. And to be able to ask some fun questions about the implications of a child manager in ways that haven't been approached much, but also talk about with Luke Edwards for that film about, the way that a lot of kids movies touch on a character's death. In that film, his grandfather dies, which allows him to take over the Minnesota Twins. And also think these interviews allowed me to even process things from my childhood in ways that I hadn't even considered before. The idea of putting those elements in movies for kids and then asking what conversations are the filmmakers hoping happen on the way out of that movie? Same with, Luke Edwards, we talked about Newsies also, which is loaded with content and narrative that you wouldn't think like a 9-year-old is going to be coming out so tell me more about the way that newspapers used to be 100 years, 80, 100 years ago, and the union strikes and that sort of that's not really what people are saying when they're coming out of the Paw Patrol movie as much.
Exactly. That's something. And Free Willy as well is another one which you interview for, and that's another example of a film that I remember Free Willy being hugely successful at the time. And that's what I like about the people you've chosen and the people you've approached, is that there is a kind of 90s here which isn't necessarily the Matrix or the, which was right at the end of the 90s as well, so it's a little bit of an outlier perhaps. But Free Willy's arguably, one of the most successful films of that era.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great point. I think you could certainly, I didn't try to reach out to people like Tom Hanks. I didn't think, and not because of Elvis. I believe I saw Elvis after the book was completed. But yeah, that's absolutely one of the great things about the 90s. And that even applies. I wrote the book I wrote before Talk 90s with me was a statistical analysis of Saved by the Bell, where I counted Zach Morris's lies and analyzed it episode to episode, season to season, and talked to a couple dozen people involved in that show also. And some of those were guest stars just who were on an episode or two, but that's kind of the same mindset of when something really connects with people, the fans and the people that think about it and care about it, and then it means something to them. It's not only about kind of the top line, and there can be a conversation to be had with Johnny Dakota or Nurse Jennifer for the Saved by the Bell example, but also Ernie Reyes Jr. about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, or Shannon Elizabeth for American Pie, or William Daniels, Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World. I wanted to connect with people who were important to the era and of their specific movies. Gabrielle Anwar, who was a big deal in the 90s for a while.
She was absolutely everywhere because of the poster for Scent of a Woman, I remember. And that scene, that was the scene. If you never saw Scent of a Woman, you saw the scene of her dancing the tango with Al Pacino.
Exactly. Yeah, that's such a good example. And of course, she had a number of starring roles too. And Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken was a movie I had always known about and never even got to until preparing for the interview. So some of this was even catching up for myself. But yeah, Scent of a Woman, exactly. Like, that was a time when even one scene could be like part of the cultural conversation. And of course, so much has changed since the 90s of what gets made and what doesn't, and how people process and discuss film versus TV, and that whole conversation that has been had, but still has areas that are worth talking about too. But yeah, that's a great example of a person I was so excited to talk to. She also has a phenomenal personality and was so open and did just a great job in our conversation. But that whether you were the star of the movie or you were part of a really important scene or just having a career for a couple of years, I mean, I was a little bit too old for Power Rangers, but I really like Felicity. And the fact that Amy Jo Johnson was in both of those, which you can't find two shows more opposite from each other, just to be able to talk to people like that really, I do think, if you ask people who are the most memorable performers from the 90s, they might go to Hanks, Tom Cruise, Wesley Snipes, Julia Roberts, the people who became massive and often stay that way. But I think if you challenge them to not just go to the obvious, there will be kind of an almost unlimited list of, like you said, I mean, Jason James Richter is doing some smaller parts now. He didn't become Tom Hanks, but Free Willy was a franchise. It was absolutely enormous in the early 90s. And to turn the clock back, I think it's important to not act like that stuff doesn't matter anymore because of what did or didn't happen to the people involved.
Yeah, and I mean, it's that thing of like, yeah, there's a churn, and stuff is going to get left by the wayside, even hugely popular stuff. Arnold Bennett was a best-selling novelist at the turn of the century, sold many more copies than James Joyce, but nobody reads those books anymore. But it is still important to go back and say, hey, people were actually reading Arnold Bennett and not Joyce back then, and not Virginia Woolf. And, we sort of need to be aware of these moments. One of the things I love about this book and why. It sort of leads on to what I'd like to ask you a little bit later about your interviewing is that you're asking these people not just about, what do you remember the roles or how was it to make the film or anything, but you're actually talking about, you ask each of them, what are you nostalgic about in the 90s? So it does have this sort of almost like a sociology experiment, if you like, that you're getting a collective memory of the decade.
Certainly. Yeah. And I was so happy that I decided to start every interview the same way, asking what they missed just about anything from that time. And then also asking about a movie or a show or a band or something that they just loved at the time or that stuck with them. Because I think, there's that inherent warmth to nostalgia and looking back on things that happened to us when we were younger. And I very much I mean, there's a reason why these are called conversations. I mean, interviews, but they were meant to be conversations that, I have on the back cover. It's meant to feel like getting a drink with someone, or like a long phone call that you had back in the 90s and probably don't have that often anymore. But by starting out each conversation with those questions, it definitely, I mean, as sort of, it's impossible not to sound trite when saying this, but it definitely establishes just like talking as people, not interviewer and star. And that's important to identify. People, you got a good sense of when you're talking to anyone in any context in your life, of kind of what vibe you got from them, what they seem to be interested in, how they listen. Everyone should know that the best material comes from the follow-up. The questions are important, and the follow-up is even more important. And starting off that way was certainly interesting to hear a lot of people talk about that they miss being less reachable.
Starbucks. They miss the early days of Starbucks. Interesting.
Browsing Blockbuster, buying CDs at Best Buy, because it makes me think of, like, we personalize our own experience, of course, that you think about, oh, when this movie came out, I was 12 or something, but you also have to think about this actor was 19 or 23 or something. They were also going through something and seeing the world a certain way. I was very aware in working on this book that as a kid, especially, processing pop culture, it like didn't even feel like something that was made by people. It seems like this magical product that just wills itself into existence in the universe, but you don't think about that it's informed by everything that goes into why a movie turns out the way that it does. So being able to, and I certainly recognize and appreciate the way that many people look back on things from their childhood in almost a glass case, and don't really want to poke it. They connect to the memory, they connect with what they were going through at that time and what something meant to them then. I feel that I am always able to be a little bit more objective than that and separate two things. I mean, American Pie, I can absolutely be honest and say that I laughed hysterically when I saw that movie in the theater in 1999. It was hugely popular and successful for a reason, but
massive franchise as well.
Yeah, but it was one of the movies discussed in this book that you can't talk about that now without being able to bring a modern sensibility to how that gets perceived. So it was great to get to talk to Shannon Elizabeth about kind of what was on her mind at the time and what was or wasn't on the movie's mind at the time. It's not meant to wag a finger at anything, but I also think it's possible to be to appreciate something and not ignore the necessary elements of the conversation. I didn't necessarily want to approach kind of only examples like that our perceptions have changed, because there are also ways that we look at things that have changed over time, not necessarily because like things have changed for the better in society, but right. Even asking Tom Everett Scott of That Thing You Do about any parallels he sees between the messages of that film and La La Land, which he was also in, which is something that honestly didn't even occur to me until preparing for the interview with him. And it was something that he had never been asked about or thought about either. So ways to bring kind of new perspective and new thought doesn't always mean an indictment or something like that. It's just bringing something that I love the opportunity to think about something in a new way. And this wasn't meant to be a book of essays of me putting my own points out there. I was so thankful for the opportunity to get to talk about a lot of things with these people. And it's a pretty great thing when someone says, oh, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, exactly. My God, Tom Hanks runs through this conversation like writing through a stick of rock. Because of course, I think was that his only film that he directed, That Thing You Do, or has he tried his hand at anything else?
He directed Larry Crown also.
Oh right, yeah, with Julia Roberts. Yes, good call. But I would never have. For some reason, I would have thought Larry Crown was directed by Ron Howard or someone. I'm not sure why, but I would never have. That Thing You Do I have that really deeply in the Tom Hanks directed bucket. No, I mean that is that. There's a couple of things that come out of that I want to go back to. But first of all, I have to ask you the question: what are you nostalgic about for the 90s?
Well, John, I don't know if there's anything.
How old were you in the 90s, by the way, Matt, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so I was born in the early 80s. So
Right.
when these like kid sports movies were coming out, I was like the great age to be seeing The Sandlot and Rookie of the Year and Little Big League and things like that. So I certainly miss, I mean, everything that came up in the conversations, I felt too, with as much as it applied to me. Not the days before social media, certainly the days when people felt more present and less reachable, all the things that many people know and feel about that time. There are benefits to technology, but there are also a lot of downsides too. And I mentioned looking for CDs or movies at Best Buy or something. The new younger generations won't appreciate that as much probably, or may not care, although maybe some will want to be a part of that type of thing as much as they can. But the ability to actually make a choice of what you're investing in and purchasing and making as part of your collection, I absolutely, and I know I'm not the first person to point this out.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Really makes a difference, especially when you're young, about the things that you feel are kind of a part of you. And there are ways in which, especially when you're a kid and loving a band, or you go see a movie in the theater and you feel like it really speaks to you for some reason, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily part of your identity, but you want to feel seen in those moments. And the fluidity of consuming and of experiencing things digitally, I have two young kids, and it's hard not to wonder what role pop culture will play for kids now, when what's being made is so different and the way that you are acquiring it is so different. And to feel like the only thing that people have to talk about probably is Iron Man 12 or whatever it is that came out that week, as opposed to that little movie that had a medium budget and wasn't trying to make $1 billion, but was rated PG or whatever. I think I guess it will be a good thing if it's an opportunity to play outside and do anything that is separate from screens. It doesn't, like, my own childhood experience doesn't have to be the way kids now experience it. But I also think part of why I responded to it so much is because of the learning that can happen, not just about how to make these things, but also what's being expressed. And that very much informed a lot of these conversations, as you saw in the book, of just thematically, what are we trying to gather? I mean, even to talk to Megan Kavanaugh about the night and day difference between how her character is treated in A League of Their Own, where seeing that movie again as an adult, you really appreciate the way that sexism is being, and misogyny is being called out. Right. Whereas I don't even think I recognized that when I was 10 or 11 or whatever. But then she's in Robin Hood Men in Tights also, and her character is the butt of the joke, coming from a completely different place. And that's not something that I've seen discussed anywhere, and isn't something that billions of people have been waiting for necessarily. But if you've seen those movies, you see where I'm coming from, and it was really, and she had a lot to say about that. So just those, when I talk about kind of bringing something new to nostalgia and those rocks that haven't been turned over, that was part of what made this such a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think people have got too many. They've become too precious about nostalgia. I mean, it's something that is valuable, and I have my own sacred cows that I love to, and my own happy places I like to go to. But ultimately, if they are destroyed by knowing more, then they're kind of not worth having, in my opinion. You know, I mean, I love James Bond, and he's racist, and he's sexist, and he is homophobic to some degree, despite the fact that he's quite obviously gay. I mean, the guy goes around in tailored suits drinking martinis all the time. The James Bond that I love is resilient enough to withstand all that criticism and withstand it all, and sort of become about that as well, you know, so that the new James Bonds that you're watching, they're constantly struggling with those questions rather than just denying them flat out. So yeah, I there's a tendency today to read people, especially on Twitter and social media. I don't think there's any serious film criticism that does this, but people, you know, berating studios for going in a woke direction with this, that, or the other. And it's just such a boneheaded idea that there is such a thing as woke, and there is such a thing as, you know, ultimately, if you cast a woman in this role or that role, or someone of color in this role or that role, and your whole thing falls to pieces, then I think it's your fragility rather than the thing itself that is the problem.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it is just about being willing to be intellectually curious.
Yeah.
And that by no means takes away the fun. It's just the world isn't binary. Things are not simple. It's okay to have multiple feelings, multiple thoughts exist at once, and want to follow that thread. Like, I mean, it reminds me of every time I reviewed one of the horrible Adam Sandler comedies, like Jack and Jill or Just Go With It or something, or Blended, you get a bunch of emails who are saying, oh, come on, can't you take a joke? As if the existence of something labeled as a comedy makes it completely, you know, free from, it doesn't mean you should be analyzing it as if it were something far more compelling and thought-provoking, but there are jokes that are making fun of a group of people, and there are jokes that aren't. And it doesn't really take that much effort to see that. Some people, I think, are kind of willfully ignoring that side of it. And everything is subjective. People like what they like. They laugh what they laugh at. Sometimes people laugh at something that they also know they shouldn't be laughing at. And there are a whole wide spectrum of reactions we can have to things like that. I'm not going to peel off an Adam Sandler filmography Band-Aid, because of course there are good dramatic performances, etc., etc. But to your point, the refusal to, or maybe just inability to kind of keep those two plates spinning at one time, even with the Saved by the Bell conversation, to go back to that whole series and see, hey, some of these episodes actually hold up really well, and are just as fun, if not more fun, than I realized when I was a kid. But also, even if you're enjoying some of that, you need to see that if Slater and Jesse are having a conversation and he holds up his fist threatening her, it doesn't ruin your childhood to look at that now and say, that's not good. They should not have done that. I'm glad we can now see that was bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a long history of domestic violence being treated as a joke and, you know, to the moon, you know, I mean, I'm gonna, what is it? The Honeymooners, I think, or the Archie Bunker, you know, it's the, yeah, I mean, we used to call, in America, you used to call an undergarment a wife beater, for crying out loud. I mean, it's right there in the language. And it's, yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's what makes things fascinating. I mean, everything changes. So we go back to things in the art, to to sort of enjoy them for themselves and for what they do. But I mean, I watch old films to see the 60s. I watch old films to see the 70s, the 80s, and alas, the 90s are now a historical period. I personally, I still think of the 90s as like last week, but it's now a historical period, you know. And people, I mean, it's got to that point where people say, oh, that look is so 90s. I'm like, what's a 90s look? I don't even understand that, but it is, you know, it exists now.
Absolutely. And part of sometimes when there's something that you don't know how you feel about it, that can be good. I mean, I moderate discussions for a couple of movie clubs throughout the year, and I'm always looking to find movies, whether they're new or not as new, that exist somewhere in that a point where people have to talk it out. And even if by the end of it, we're all still a little bit unsure about something, or maybe their opinion changed a little bit throughout the conversation, and then even to look at the book and something like I talked with Devin Rattray, Buzz McAllister from Home Alone. Home Alone is one of the biggest hits of the 90s. And yet to watch it now, it's hard not to be stunned at like the kind of Looney Tunes-ness of the violence and just how much more Kevin perpetrates than Marv or Harry do. And then trying to reconcile like where your head was at the time with how it seems now. And then, I mean, the fact that they released a Home Sweet Home Alone, I think was the title of the new one, that was unwatchable. that only helped crystallize that this doesn't quite work anymore, or maybe just not in the way that they did it. But I think it can be fascinating to try to figure that out for yourself of mixing those old feelings with those new thoughts. And maybe that's uncomfortable for people. And I don't take that away from anyone. You maybe don't want to complicate your fondness for something. You want to just be able to look back and enjoy it. But it's also, again, these were real people who were making the art too. So talking to Billy West of Doug and Futurama and Space Jam, who is as honest as anyone I spoke with about his feelings about animation and like his roles and kind of putting heart into things or like the very unique experience of a voice actor. I just think people can love what they love, and you got to personalize your own pop cultural experience. A lot of why I was excited to go back to the 90s for this book was both because of my own experience of when I saw this stuff, but also certainly the quantity of material coming out now. We're not being bombarded with 100 movies a year that are worth processing this way, or that I think kids are going to be experiencing the same way. Whereas when I think back, if you were to ask me what were some movies that are not covered in this book that were impactful to me in the 90s, to be able to say like everything from School Ties to Quiz Show to Boogie Nights to even a movie I don't necessarily, I don't have any particular feelings about Blank Check as a movie, but just like the fact that movies like that existed, or that I remember being on a cruise ship and seeing like the same part of True Lies every time. Just like your memories from a certain part of your life and the pop culture you consume are going to be fixed. And it's impossible not to be curious about what people of that age are going to be consuming now and what effect that will have on them.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, I find that, I find that transition. It's interesting you mentioned True Lies, because like that transition from the 80s action blockbuster, and then by the end of the 90s, you're into sort of Keanu Reeves and sort of a far different version of sort of masculinity as well. That's a really interesting point. When you set about writing this book, you're and you just said earlier about how surprising some of the answers were for you. What was the biggest surprise that sort of changed your mind, or changed the way you viewed the 90s?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way to frame that. I would say the biggest surprise, this is a little bit broader than what your question was, but I think my biggest surprise was just where each conversation went and how far it was able to go. Because if every time I had gotten on the phone with someone, they had said, I have 20 minutes, and no matter how well this goes, I only have 20 minutes.
Oh.
That was exactly not the point of the book. The whole point was being able to, like I said, feel like you're having a drink and just talking about things in a way that, I had never met any of these people. These were phone conversations without any defined length of time, but you prepare extensively and listen. And I think as an interviewer, I recognized that it was something that if I had tried to do something like this 10 years earlier, it would have been a completely different book. Because like anyone with anything they do, you hopefully learn and adapt how you approach things. And the ability to kind of bring up some sensitive questions or things that might feel awkward. There are so many kind of forks in the road in an interview or a conversation where you can either like move on because either the clock is ticking or you want to get to the next thing, but you have to like follow your own curiosity. And I would say, to your question, my delight and gratitude and surprise was that 94% of the conversations in the book, anytime I kept following a thought down a road or kind of split it off into something else, the subjects were right there with me and able to, and there's also a benefit in reflecting on things that happened to a long time ago versus promoting something that's happening now. So people's ability to be honest about, whether it's Karen Parsons talking about how the cast handled their involvement in sort of the storylines of that show, while also not having a lot of Black writers, working on things like that. Or, Tom Everett Scott being honest about some of the choices he made after breaking out in That Thing You Do. Gabrielle Anwar, even, her father is an acclaimed editor, and he edited her documentary called Sexology. That's interesting. That's something that you wouldn't automatically, is not everyone would have their family member, their parents, edit the movie about themselves, exploring elements of sexuality. But and that those are just a couple examples. Even when it's basically, you can't ignore, every interviewer should know you. Just because something is uncomfortable, if it's something that like a reader would be wondering about, even if it's bringing up to Jason James Richter at the end of that conversation, you have to talk about Michael Jackson when it comes to Free Willy. He was part of that. Even in the Dougie Doug interview, if you saw at the end of that, like after we talked about Cool Runnings and Operation Dumbo Drop and his sitcom and a bunch of things, I said, we're at that time where there's no good way to bring it up. Before I could even get to the question, he said Cosby. And it's not you don't want to bring something up for no reason. You need to have an actual question and feel like there's something new that you can gather from that. But the ability to be curious and understanding, and empathy is an important word, and it probably gets thrown around a lot now, but being able to, this is not, I was so lucky to do all of the interviews that I did in my time at Red Eye. And when you have 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 to 40 minutes sometimes with people, that is a privilege. And I love making it the best of that always. Talking to people like Brie Larson, Will Ferrell, LeBron James, even when they made the documentary about him. But to not have that ticking clock and be able to just let the conversation unfold, as opposed to knowing that you have a certain number of pages in a newspaper that you're trying to, the daily paper you're trying to fill later that week or something, versus my goal here just being, I want each of these interviews to be maybe 10 to 15 pages in a book. It's going to feel long, but not too long. We're only going to include the good material, and let's see what happens. The fact that played out as successfully as it did was absolutely a testament to the great subjects that I spoke with. And I'm proud that I felt like by that point in my career that I've been doing this for so long, I knew how to execute this in a way that I wouldn't have when I was younger.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. It's a fact that I sort of does bounce along throughout the book, which is, because of what has happened in more recent years, we are looking back on the 90s, and some of these people, as you say, the Michael Jackson relationship with the Free Willy star, the Bill Cosby's influence, and there are these people who I kind of always feel the stuff that happened. It sort of stretches into the 80s as well, with Corey Feldman going through it's that I think it goes back to sort of make it into a deeper point, perhaps. It goes back to this idea you mentioned earlier that these are not artifacts which are sort of beamed down onto Earth by aliens. They're made by human beings who are dealing with some shit, and are dealing with industry, and they're dealing with stuff which is going on in their lives that we have no access to. And now we kind of do have access to. And, American Pie is not just sort of a bit squirm-inducing because the parameters of comedy have moved on. I mean, I remember watching that when it first came out and thinking, this is a kind of refreshing version of the American sex comedy, the Porky's, the National Lampoon's Animal House. I wouldn't have taken my feminist girlfriend to see it. Absolutely not. But it wasn't something that I felt terrible about going to see. And some of these films, get reclaimed. There's Showgirls, which is was absolutely trounced when it first came out, is now considered something of a cult masterpiece. So it's
certainly. And sometimes it's just about putting an idea out there and seeing what someone thinks about something, not trying to identify it as right or wrong, but just to curate, like for American Pie, talking with Shannon Elizabeth about, I said 8 years after American Pie, we had Superbad. And then less than a decade after that, we had Booksmart. How much do we feel like the movies that are being made about teenagers in the US specifically, is that kind of a reflection of how people are being raised and where people's heads are at, and just trying to go into things that we're wondering about. But you also reminded me, and I want to read this quote so I get it right. I talked with Hill Harper, who was in a lot in the 90s, in particular, a couple Spike Lee movies like Get on the Bus and He Got Game. And he talked in our conversation about not that he really, really didn't like Black Klansmen. And a quote that I pulled out from my interview with him, which he said, it's tough because when I look back at the work of the 90s and all the different filmmakers, the different voices, I feel like in certain ways we were further along then than now. And he was saying that in the context of kind of movies about social issues and the way that things are explored and discussed. Because I wanted to talk about when movies come out that are trying to make us learn about the world outside the theater, if the only people that are ever going to see those are the ones who are, in theory, at least kind of mostly on board with everything that is being said in the first place, like how do we evaluate the impact of these things when 30 years goes by and the problems some things have not gotten better? Which is a challenging kind of cultural context to put that work into, and it doesn't take anything away from the quality of some great films to say that they didn't change society. But when something is also, in theory, trying to exist beyond just the film world, it's sobering to recognize that no matter how great that work is, certain things obviously take a lot more than that to change. But then you have to sort of wonder about like, well, how much does that play into what gets made at all? Of course, it's oftentimes just goes back to sort of the financial component, but there's a lot to the way that art plays a role in a lot of ways that we experience our lives, both in what we want to laugh at, but also how we want to process the people around us and the issues going on. So I was really happy that by casting a wide net for a book like this, you can touch on things that are heavy, but also things that are light, and really just go, again, like the mix of fun and thought-provoking is something that movies of the 90s were able and willing to give us. So the book had to reflect that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talk about Free Willy, you talk about an entertaining children's movie, but you're also talking about animal rights. You're also talking about environmentalism. I mean, those and talking about social issues and how they're addressed in film these days. You sort of, I'm scratching my head to think of sort of an environmental. What have we got? Avengers Endgame, where the environmentalist is the guy who wants to destroy half of the universe's population. In fairness, it's not exactly Venom, where the environmentalist is the guy who's the baddie. It's not like we've gone, as you say, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, perhaps.
Did you see Sorry to cut you off, John. Did you see Don't Look Up, the Adam McKay?
Yes,
film?
yes.
That comes to mind as well.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a fairly successful political satire, but I don't know. Adam McKay's, if that's what we've got to settle for in terms of satire, then satire is not in a good shape. I don't think it's a bit too. It's not savage enough for me.
Yeah, it's interesting that people were both complaining that it wasn't subtle, but it also wasn't savage either. But I think
I don't mind it not being subtle. I have no problem with it, satire. On the contrary, I think satire has an absolute license to be unsubtle. That's kind of its point. It's a sledgehammer. It's not a scalpel. Or it's both.
Sure. Yeah, it's hard when it seems like I think that movie felt like trying to approach something important, but that was so sort of front and center that maybe it didn't feel like as much of a risk compared to like a movie like Four Lions, which if you tell someone about that, they're like, wait, they made a comedy about what? Like, really? Are you sure? That's a movie that takes risks. Or even sort of the playfulness of like In the Loop, which was one of the best comedies of the last 20 years. 15 years now, that's existing in a very different world than Don't Look Up. But I thought that was still pretty funny and a bit better than the conversation maybe gave it credit for.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do think it got a kicking. And as far as Adam McKay movies go, which don't star Will Ferrell, it was one of his better ones. Interestingly, I think what it was trying for was something which was like Dr. Strangelove, which is you can look at nuclear annihilation and the madness comes over you, even as everyone seems to be playing it straight. Whereas I felt everybody put their comedy pants on, and straight actors trying to play comedy. I don't think Meryl Streep but interestingly, Armando Iannucci, who had a hand in, who directed In the Loop and had a hand in Four Lions as well, I think, comes from very much the same stable as Chris Morris, has recently signed on to write and direct a stage version of Dr. Strangelove. So that's there you go. You see, that's the satirist that we need. There, and what did he do as well? He did Veep as well, was his TV show. Brilliant. So we're coming to the end of our conversation. There's 2 questions I want to ask before we wind up, though. One is, already I think you've given anybody a writer who's thinking of going into interviewing, you've given several cardinal lessons throughout this conversation. One would be, do your preparation. Yeah, make sure you know your stuff. The second would be, to listen and to be sort of open about where the conversation leads you. What other things would you recommend for anybody who's sort of maybe hasn't interviewed someone and they're a bit nervous and what would you suggest?
I love that question, John. That's awesome. I think it's something that you have to be willing to learn. And also continue to evolve the way that you approach things, and you recognize that a lot is happening at once. I mentioned the importance of asking the question that you think people are going to be wondering about, which sort of suggests thinking about like who's going to read this. That is part of it. but it's also, in my opinion, about bringing your own voice to things. I was not the story by any means, but the more you just ask things the way that everyone else does or the way that you've read before, the more you just, it's not interesting. That wouldn't be interesting to me. I don't think that would be interesting to read. I think the ability to kind of simultaneously personalize, but also not have a kind of myopic view of things, is showing that you are interested in how other people feel too, but recognizing that you're filtering it through your own experience. So I think the ability to have that perspective, I think, really informed and was a reason why these conversations played out as long and as successfully that they did. I mean, any interviewer will tell you about that you continually learn about listening. And it's not just about the patience to give people space to talk, but also, I mean, I think back on old interviews that I did, and there are times when I wish that I would have approached things differently or let something unfold differently, because this book was a unique chance to have the time to ask questions that sometimes led to longer answers, and then hear things within that pointed, sent us down another corner. Whereas when you don't have the time for that, or any reason why you just aren't in the place in your mind to know kind of where to take that next. So, I mean, I think anyone wants to look back on the way that they do things and say, it's just like the nostalgia for what you watched or listened to, or, I appreciated what was on my mind at the time and what I knew and what I didn't know, but I have learned some things from then, and I'm proud of how it went, and I did my best, and maybe something will happen 10 years from now that I'll look back on this and say, oh, now there's a little something, maybe if I could do it now, I would do it a little bit differently. But that interest in self-editing, I mean, I think there are probably a lot of people who get into journalism or writing anything who are like, oh, I'm just going to knock something out, my editor will fix it. No, your editors are there to help you, but you are the first person in charge of making your own work good. And if you're not absolutely ruthless about how you think about your own material and willing to look at it again and continually work that muscle, that is the only way that after you've been doing it for 15 to 20 years, you can then say, wow, because I did this so much and cranked out so much for so long, and I learned so much, and it was deliberate, but the things I learned were not on purpose. I was just trying my absolute best all the time. And that's how you get to a point of where you can talk to someone for 80 minutes and go back to it and say, wow, humbly, this is all not only usable, but new and thoughtful and entertaining, and exactly what I was hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really interesting advice. I love the thing about the editors as well is like you have to make sure that the people above you or the people between you and the readers are doing the least possible work. If your editor is reading your copy and going, fine, up it goes, filed, ready to publish, and they don't have to touch it, they'll love you. and you'll have the benefit of seeing what you've written out there rather than half of what you've written and things that the editor has had to fix and change around and add because you didn't do your job. So I think that's really good advice for anybody out there. I really, really appreciate that, Matt. I think there's loads of pearls of wisdom there. It's so great talking to you and hearing your experience. But final question has to be, of course, film books. What film book would you recommend for our listeners?
Yeah, I was thinking what I want to mention. Admittedly, I am someone that I like reading memoirs from people. Right now, I just started Minka Kelly's book. But the one I wanted to shout out in particular was Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley, which I read last fall. And oh,
yes. I've read some excerpts of this.
It is phenomenal. She's just, I've always found her really thoughtful and impressive. And her book was I had reasonably high expectations going into that book, and it met or exceeded all of them. I would say it was among the best books I've read of the sort in the last several years, for sure. So if anyone hasn't checked that one out yet, that would definitely be the one I would point to.
Excellent. That's a brilliant recommendation. Yes, I've read the excerpts. Obviously, they made headlines in terms of her making Baron Munchausen with Terry Gilliam. But I've always liked her films. I've always, loved her. Some of the films that I've seen that she directed, and she's, she's one of those voices that is out there that is, that's definitely one I'm going to have to put on my reading list. Well, thanks so much for coming and talking to me, Matt. I really appreciate it, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much for having me, John. This was wonderful. Really appreciate your time and interest.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Welcome back to Two Judgy Girls. I'm Mary from the Bay.
And I'm Courtney from LA. TJG is the podcast where we spill all the tea on your favorite reality TV shows, celebrity gossip, and everything in between. We're here to bring you our unfiltered opinions, hilarious commentary, and plenty of laughs along the way.
We're two SDSU Delta Gamma sisters with a microphone and a whole lot of opinions. Each week, we dive headfirst into the wild world of reality television, from Bravo to all the trash TV you could want. We break down the drama, dissect the latest scandals, and share our thoughts on everything from the jaw-dropping moments to the embarrassing antics.
But that's not all. We're not here to just gossip. We're here to connect with you, the jurors, and share our love of all things pop culture. Whether we're dishing on the latest celebrity breakups, discussing our favorite guilty pleasure movies, or sharing embarrassing stories from our own lives, we promise to keep it real, keep it fun, and keep you coming back for more.
Come judge with us.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.